Hello, friends. Nice to be back. Jonathan has asked me to provide an introduction into this new series in and around radical discipleship. So that's basically what I'll do is I'm just going to introduce this theme. And I'm going to do it in a particular way by first asking you, what's been the best movie that you've seen in the last, year? Tell the person next to you, go to it. Best movie. Yeah. Okay, friends. I personally love to see a good movie if I can get one. So I love movies. So I've got a question. So stick with me on these questions. How many in the room have seen the movie The Sound of Music? Show of hands. Now, okay, most of you here. If I was to say to you, for example, that, The Sound of Music, basically, it's about guitars, what would you say? No, you'd say no. Okay, so you're right on that one. I mean, when you do look at the movie Sound of Music, you can't just diminish it, shrink it down to guitars. I mean, guitars are present. I mean, there's that pivotal scene when they all come out with guitars and strumming away. But there's more in the movie, yes. There's a bigger story, isn't there? I mean, there is this family who are needing a mother. There are 7 kids. There is this bloke who was an Austrian, commander or something, submarine commander. Then you've got the backdrop of Hitler and Austria and so on. So there's a bigger story. Okay, let me try another movie. How many here have seen Ben-Hur? 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 How many have seen the 1959 version with Charlton Heston? How many have seen the recent one? Okay. Now, if I was to say to you that Ben-Hur is essentially about chariot wheels, what would you say? Nah? I mean, look, hey, in Ben-Hur, there was a chariot race that lasted 9 minutes. And there were 2,500 horses used in that movie. So, but you're right. I mean, you look at that movie, there's so much more happening. There's a bigger story. I mean, you've got the story of Rome. You've got the story of Christ in that movie. But you've also got the story of a broken family and leprosy. That's Ben-Hur. Let's try another one. What about the Titanic? How many have seen the Titanic? Okay. Tell the person very briefly next to you, what was that movie all about? Go to it. Okay. If I was to say to you that the movie, The Titanic, basically it's all about the North Atlantic Ocean, what would you say? Nah, missed it again, Mick. Nah, and you'd be right. I mean, there is the water, there's a lot of water, but there's so much more in that movie. You can't shrink it, diminish it to just the water. So, for example, in that movie, it's kind of like the apex, the climax of the Industrial Revolution. They've built the biggest, ship that has ever been, the unsinkable ship. There's another story about more of a socio-economic story about upper classes, lower classes, but you've also got a very deeply personal story. You've got a love story. Okay, here's another movie. Are you enjoying this? Another movie. How many have seen the movie The Lord of the Rings? Okay, how many have seen it twice? Put 2 hands up. Okay, 3 times. Put a foot up as well. Okay. Now, if I was to say to you that essentially The Lord of the Rings is about New Zealand, What would you say? I mean, in one sense it is. I mean, it was entirely filmed in this land. And did you know that 1 out of 160 Kiwis were involved in that movie? One person in every 160 were involved in that movie. That is incredible. But to say that The Lord of the Rings is just about New Zealand would be to miss the bigger story. What is the bigger story in The Lord of the Rings? What did Tolkien, why did he write it? Do you know what he actually came out and said when interviewed? Why are you writing this book and why have you written it and so on? He said, I'm wanting to write about deathliness. The whole thing in and around of death and dying. That is why he wrote the book, The Lord of the Rings. Okay, so there's a bigger story. How many here have read Harry Potter? Confession time, Harry Potter? Actually, not too many people in GCC read Harry Potter. I found that in the first service as well. Is that have you got a list of banned books or something? No. But anyway, how many have heard of Harry Potter? That's right. And you know, I could say to you, you know, Harry Potter is essentially all about, I don't know, magic and broomsticks, you know? And you'd be saying, well, they are in the movie, but there's so much more going on, and you'd be right. And why did J.K. Rowling, what's her name, J.K.? That's it. Why did she write those books? Do you know? She lost her parents apparently when she was 12. And so Harry Potter in the books also had just lost his parents. And Voldemort, he's trying to escape the whole thing around death. It's again like Tolkien. The book is essentially about deathliness. It's interesting, isn't it? Are you interested? Thank you for that. Let me try a different tack then. How many here have read the Bible? Show of hands. How many have read the Bible in the last 24 hours? Show of hands. Yes, I thought so. Okay. If I was to say to you that essentially the Bible is all about philosophy, good morality, it's about good advice, it's about religion, what would you say to me? That essentially the Bible is about philosophy, morality, religion, and good advice. What would you say? You would say it's more than that. Now, those things are in there, but you are rightly hinting at me, no, there's a bigger story. Here's my final one. So if there's a bigger story, and it's the story of the gospel, if I was to say to you that the gospel is essentially about you being pardoned and being transformed such that you can live a better life, and then when you die, you go to heaven. Is that the gospel? Have that discussion with the person next to you. Is that the gospel? Show of hands. Who would be quite happy to state and claim that that is the gospel? Show of hands. Hardly anybody has put up their hand. So, what is the gospel? Now, I'm with you. Those things that I've just named, I don't think are the gospel. I think they are the fruit of the gospel, but they are not the gospel themselves. But don't get me wrong. Those three things that I named, I mean, forgiveness. Who's not to want to be forgiven? I mean, for the load of guilt to be taken from oneself, it's such a wonderful thing. I mean, to enjoy that on a daily basis, yes? And who's not to want to be transformed and become a better person? I don't know about you, but when I look at myself in the mirror, I go, not bad. I mean, I do. I kind of think that, I've been on this journey of discipleship for decades now, and I have experienced a radical transformation. And I mean, this is the me I want to be. I mean, this, my friends, is the best version of myself. I do believe it, and it's not bad, and it's God's version of me. He can do that transformative work. Oh, I have changed. Ask my kids. They're the best ones to say whether you've changed or not. Ask those close to you, and they are amazed at how I've changed over the decades. And then, of course, I mentioned the other one about, going to heaven when you die. I mean, that speaks of a quality of life before you die and a quality of life after you die. I should be hearing some amens at this point. I mean, this is all good stuff, but it is the fruit of the gospel. It is not the gospel. Yes? So what, therefore, is the gospel? Now, the best way that I can sort of take you into this is by sharing a bit of my own story, if you don't mind. And some of you have heard this story, but it is so good that's worth telling again. So still look interested. But it goes like this. You see, in former decades, I was, into the hippie drug counterculture world. And for a number of years, I was barefooted, had clothes that were filthy as they could walk without me being in them. I had long hair, beautiful long hair, but it was all matted and greasy. I had this beard, and I had a dog called Poet. And I used to just sort of live anywhere. And then I was in the drug scene, dealing Class A drugs and that sort of stuff, as a number were in those days, and they still do. And I thought I had to get out of the drug scene in Gisborne, so I thought I'd shoot down to the South Island. So I went down there and I hitchhiked all the way. And I had my dog called Poet, and we hitchhiked to Christchurch. I got there, I had nowhere really to live. So I just gate crashed anywhere. I just slept under bridges at times, not often, but sometimes. I just kind of jumped over a fence into a second-hand car lot and spread out on the back of a ute, the tray, for example. I gate crashed at people's places. I just lived anywhere. And in that time, I used to turn up to the square, the square in Christchurch, turned up to the square, and I would turn up there every lunchtime because there was this kind of tall, black, hooded, cloaked creature. And he had pointy hat. He was called the Wizard, and this is pre-Harry Potter, and he was there, and he was trying to hold the crowd spellbound with the wizardry and incantations of life that belonged to him. And as he was speaking, this little white fella with a big black Bible would then get up and speak at the same time. And after a while, they would turn on each other and they would argue with each other in front of us, the gathering crowd. And I don't think much has changed, but back then I thought this has got to be the only entertainment in Christchurch. So I rocked up every lunchtime to this kind of shootout, okay? And then one day, a friend of the little short white fella with a big black Bible, who was who? Who was who? Ray Comfort. So a friend of his, he came and approached me as I was seated on the cathedral steps, and he says, "G'day, g'day." We did the whole, intro thingy. No. And then he said, "Where do you live?" And I said, "Oh, anywhere." And he said, "What do you mean, anywhere?" And I said, "Anywhere." He said, "Anywhere." And I thought, these thick Christians, And he wandered off, gave up, and then we got to know each other the weeks and the months following this. And he came back after a while, several months, and he said, "Anywhere? Do you mean, when you said anywhere, you meant anywhere?" And I said, "Anywhere." So he wandered off again. And then several months later, he came back and he said, Mick, anywhere? And I said, anywhere. And then he said, come with me. So I went with him. And I hopped in his car and he drove 10 minutes to Upper Colombo Street, and he got out of the car and he says, come with me. So I went with him and he went down this long alleyway, come with me. And then he walked into this big house, come with me. So I went with him. He walked down the corridor, follow me. So I followed him. He walked through the kitchen, come on, Mick. Then he walked into his bedroom. I was a bit worried at that point. He seemed okay. And then we got into the bedroom and he closed the door, and I, of course, thinking, what next, And he goes straight to his wardrobe. And he opens the wardrobe and there are all these jackets and coats. And then I'm thinking, Narnia, And then he pulls a suitcase from the top of his wardrobe. He unzips it, puts jacket and shirts and so on into the suitcase, zips up the suitcase, goes to the bedroom door, opens the bedroom door, turns to me and says, see ya. I said, what? And he said, see ya. I said, what? And he said, oh, yeah, see ya. So we're having one of these conversations again, And I said, what? And he said, oh, this room is now yours. You can have this bedroom and you can have everything in it. And I've had the room paid up for months in advance. And there's another bloke who lives in this house, and his name is Bruce, and he's a bus driver. But this room is now yours. And he left. And I didn't see him again for years. So I looked around the room and I thought, not bad, And then as I was canvassing the room, I saw this coffee table right next to the bed. And on the coffee table was a Bible. And I found myself thinking to myself, who's not to want to read this book after an incredible demonstration of love? So I picked up the Bible. And of course, as I read it over the coming weeks, I read of another demonstration of love. The love of Jesus Christ. And I liked him. Gosh, I liked him. He was always getting into trouble, Jesus. And I thought, not bad. I could join his merry band, And then as I read on further, I saw that he was a life changer. Because, for years, I knew that there was something swimming in my skin bag. If I stretched my skin bag and looked in, there was something that was lurking within that kept sabotaging me, kept hijacking me. It was like there was an assassin that lived inside of me that wanted to take me out. And I didn't know what it was. And when you don't know that which you have and you can't put a name to it, that's what it means to be lost. You look at people and they know that there's something physically wrong and they go to a doctor, but the doctor can't put a name to it. You should look into their eyes. They are lost. I was lost. But as I read on, I read of this one that I liked, and he put names to the things that I was struggling with as a person, and he said that he was the cure. He was the life changer. I wanted that. I wanted life change. But then I read on, as you do. It's a big book. And I read on, and then I saw something I didn't like. I read on, and I saw that he self-defined himself as leader. And I knew what that would mean. And I thought, well, stuff that. So what I did with the Bible is I picked it up and I threw it into the corner, literally, physically. Because like a good Kiwi, no one's going to tell me how to live my life, thank you very much. Isn't that the Kiwi way? People? But for the next 9 months, I just couldn't get this thing of, life changer, leader, rats, life changer, yes, leader. I just didn't want to. In other words, if you ask me this morning, Mick, what is the gospel? See, life change is the fruit. But what is the gospel? It's Jesus as leader. Now, what do I mean by that? You see, if you read the scriptures, you know, the gospel is all about the return of the King. God always said that he would come visiting this planet again. He always said that he'd come to a particular people in a particular place at a particular time as a particular person, as Jesus Christ. The gospel is all about the royal birth of Jesus. And it's about his life, his words, his works, his deeds. The gospel is about the coronation of the King. That in the cross, that was his coronation. And like all good kings, he was taking on the real enemies behind all the other enemies. And as king, he was taking on the enemy of sin that dismantles you, that diminishes you, that distorts you, that twists you. And he was also taking on the enemy of death that stops you. The gospel is all about the triumph of the King in the resurrection. The gospel is about how God became king on earth as in heaven. I mean, you read the scriptures. It says in Mark chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning, the start of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You go to Romans chapter 1 and verse 3, and it talks about the gospel about his son. You go to 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 2, and it says that you are saved through it, the gospel. Salvation is not the gospel. You are saved through it. This it is the good news. Salvation is the fruit of that good news. What is the good news? Jesus Christ is King. Period. Full stop. That is the gospel. You go to 2 Timothy 2:8 and it says, remember Jesus the King according to my gospel. So the gospel, people, is not about you. It's not about you. You are involved, you have a part, you are to be engaged, but why do we make everything about us? You know, your forgiveness, your transformation, you going to heaven, that is the fruit of the gospel. But the gospel itself is about Jesus is King, full stop, period. So what do you do with a king? I mean, what do you do with a king? I mean, what do you do with your hands? What do you do with your head? What do you do with your heart? What do you do with a king? I mean, what do you do? What is to be our posture with a king? What do you do with your hands? You know, just recently I had a cancer scare. And they rushed me in to get check-up, you know, the ultrasound, the whole deal. And then the following morning, they ring me up straight away, first thing in the morning. And they just said, look, we just wanted you to know that, you know, clean bill of health. And now, when I heard that good news, what did I do? Yes! You know, oh, good! Some years ago, I completed a PhD. By the way, as you've heard me say, that stands for permanent head damage. Yeah. But sometimes, and I had to give an oral defense, as you do in these things. So I went into this room, and there were all these scholars and academics, and I gave my oral defense. Then they say to you, could you please leave the room now? So I left the room. And they discussed whether it would be awarded or not. And it was about an hour and a half that they discussed it. And then they invited me back into the room. And they opened the room. And as I was entering through the doorway, they said, oh, welcome back, Dr. Duncan. And in a very Kiwi, self-effacing way, with this hand, I just went, yes. But my question this morning is this: what do you do with your hands with King Jesus? What do you do with your head? What do you do with your heart? What do you do with your knees? So let me tell you what I did over 40 years ago. When I saw that Jesus is King, I bent my knees. I bent. And I bowed my head. And I prostrated my hands. And I said to this King Jesus, I now give you my sacred vow, my solemn pledge. I give away my life for the rest of my life to you. In other words, people, I gave him the allegiance of my heart. And if you take the word faith and you just dismantle it a bit in the Greek, at the forefront of that word pistis is not just understanding, it's not just entrusting. At the forefront of that word is allegiance. In other words, I said to this Jesus, I am now yours. I'm yours. I am yours. And that was voluntary slavery. I became a slave. And for 40 years, I've been a servant and a slave of King Jesus. Just say the word, Master. Say the word, Master, and I'll do it. I've struggled at it. I haven't always done it well. But that has been the posture of my life. That has been the orientation of my heart. And please get this, people. When Jesus as King comes to you, he just doesn't want your heart. He wants your life. And you must give him your life. So many people have this attitude that, it's like they have a sheet of A4 and they scribble out the script of their life and they go to this Jesus and say, would you bless this? Do you know what Jesus does? He takes that and he screws it up. He throws it over there. And he gets a fresh new sheet of A4 and he says, right, me as the king and you as the servant. We will now together work out the script of your life. People, I have traveled extensively. I've spoken to hundreds and thousands of groups over my 4 decades. Why is it that so many have embraced this, the fruit of the gospel, but so few have walked away from this? And even in this room this morning, there are some that for you, your Christianity and the gospel is all about this. But you have yet really to do this. And you need to hear from me. If you just do the fruit without doing the gospel, it just doesn't work. In 1985, and with this I'll finish, in 1985, Ruby and I, we took a 9-month-old baby and a 2-year-old baby, and I've shared this before here, and we went to live in the slums of Manila in a plywood shack, mud floor, the whole deal. We did that for 10 years. And since that chapter, we've done other costly chapters as well. But in that chapter, if I put my little finger through our plywood wall, it went into the family here, the family there, the family there, the family there, the family there. And as I've told that story around the traps, people have invariably come up to me and they've said, Mick, oh, wow, that's radical. That is discipleship at its core. Goodness me, you epitomize the radical discipleship. That must have been so difficult for you. And I've said to them, no. It was the decision prior to that that was the most difficult. And every decision subsequent to this has been easier. Not easy, but easier. In other words, going to Manila is not the expression of radical discipleship. I mean, radical discipleship has 1,000 different faces to it. But it was the decision prior to that. The decision of bowing and bending my will, my heart to Jesus as King. That, my friends, that took me 9 months to settle. So we're starting this new series on radical discipleship. And Jonathan asked me to just intro it. So where does it start? It starts on your knees. It starts with bowing your head. It starts with putting your hands out in surrender and saying, Jesus is King. I'm prepared to give away my life for the rest of my life. That's how it works. What do you think? Have you done that? Do you do it? I do it on a daily basis. Would you like to do it now? Do you feel a sense to just kind of reorientate? Let's all stand. So I'm going to ask that there be no music at this point. Because, you know, sometimes the soft music comes on and we get all very, no. And I'm going to ask that people come to the front who you just sense that this is something that you need to do this morning. Like I say, I do it every day. But you just want to declare afresh that the kind of the orientation of your heart and your life is Jesus is King. And you're willing to come into that voluntary slavery where there is still intimacy. But Jesus, King, just say the word and I'll do it. Who here would like to come, not to the front, but I'm going to ask you to do that, but you're not coming to me, you're not coming up front, you're coming to the King. You're coming to the King. If this is you, could you start coming now? Just come. We had a number in the first service. Just start coming. If you hear your heart beating and you know that this is something that you just want to resettle, re-engage in, redo, renew, reorientate, re-practice, just come to the front. Some of you just start getting down on your knees, start prostrating yourselves, as it were. You're here before King Jesus, before no other. It's just you and the King. And you just want that submissive, I surrender all, that relinquishment orientation. There's some more out there, I feel. Let it be that GCC is a church that has as its core and center Jesus the King. Let me pray. Our King, we start this new series on radical discipleship, but we start it with the one, not with the what, but with the who. We start it with who you are. And you are King, you are leader, you are Lord. And there's only one posture, Lord, and that is bending our knees, bowing our heads, giving you our hearts, giving you our lives. We submit, we surrender all. May your will be done in our lives on earth as in heaven. King Jesus. And for those, Lord, that have come up the front to live this life, they need the enabling of the Holy Spirit. And we pray, Lord, that you will enable them to surrender. You will enable them by your Spirit to follow you. Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah. So as the musos just kick in with some worship here, for those who would still like to come to the front, keep coming. For those who would like to stay at the front, just stay there and just go back to your seats when you need to. But we're just going to sing a few songs now.